Good afternoon, Dr. Brian Peters. How are you
Good
today?
afternoon. I'm doing well. This is trying a new thing today.
Trying a new thing out. Well, this is my one of my favorite times of the week, and when I get to do these Future of Engagement podcasts with Dr. Brian Peters, and it's just a heck of a lot of fun. And we've been getting some good reaction to them. I guess everyone knows by now that you have achieved your or received your doctorate in organizational industrial psychology and did your dissertation on engagement, which means you're literally a doctor of engagement. So that's fun. And I don't think there's a better person to be doing a Future of Engagement podcast with. We've covered a couple of really fun topics beforehand, talking about the importance of leadership, the difference between leadership styles and behaviors. I know that you, as a scientist, really favor looking at leadership behaviors because there's something that you can track. And we talked a lot about the importance of communication and collaboration in our first couple of podcasts. Today, I want to ask a provocative question because I know that you and I have argued about this a lot. And we're going to continue to argue probably for our entire lives. And my question is, and you know that I see this differently than you, can people change? Because if you want to improve an organization and people want to change or have a change management program to drive change, then people have to be able to change. Do you think that if a leadership wants to improve his leadership, his or her leadership, become better with people to get them more engaged, do you think that they can actually change if they really don't have it in them, if they have no desire to change and were kind of born a jerk? Is that possible? I know you see this differently than me. Take it away. Can human beings change?
Um, yeah, so the answer is yes. So we can just end there. It's been great speaking with you. It's a great episode.
You get a little
No
bored.
more, no need to talk about it anymore.
I'm
We're
really bored
good.
with that, Dr. Peters. More than that. Why do you think that people can change?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny. So like your statement that you made, just born bad. I don't know that I believe that anybody. I should back up. Yes, there are some people that are probably born bad, right? Like there are mental disorders that exist, right? And that there's genetic quality to a lot of those, or at least some of those. I think the vast majority of people are not necessarily born bad. There's actually a book, The Art of Happiness in a Troubled World. It's I don't know if I mentioned this before, but it was written not by the Dalai Lama, but with interviews from the Dalai Lama. And he talks about in there that he doesn't believe that anybody is evil, that people just do evil things, right? And so I think, to me, that makes a lot of sense. Again, there are sociopaths and things like that that exist out there, but that's the small percentage of people. So I think the vast majority of people can change. Whether or not they will is another question. I think it can get a little bit more challenging the more of the behaviors are sort of ingrained into the person. But I don't believe that just because somebody is not doing well in an organization that there's no hope for them, or that again those behaviors can't change. I was actually listening to a little small tidbit, like a short of a podcast where he kind of talks about this. Basically saying like what it kind of goes back to what we were saying with leadership styles versus behaviors, right? He gave an example of somebody who wasn't doing well in the organization, and they were just saying, hey, you're a jerk, right? You need to be less of a jerk. And it was kind of like all that was being told to this person. And so this leader came in, and he sat down with them, and he, instead of just saying like, hey, you need to be nicer, you need to be a jerk, whatever, was saying, hey, this is the perception. You may not agree with it, but this is the perception. And then laid out, a couple of things that the person is doing that is making them be perceived as this jerk, that if instead of doing X, they could do Y, right? So whenever this situation comes up, do this instead. And they saw a big turnaround in that person. It doesn't necessarily mean the person, the core of who they are maybe didn't change, but maybe their behavior changed. But when you're looking at, or maybe they just slightly adapted it, maybe they're still a jerk deep down. But at the end of the day, even if they're a jerk deep down, if the behaviors they're exhibiting are not those things, does it really matter, at least from a workplace perspective?
Well, let me just throw out two ideas that may sound kind of random, but I think they do kind of go together. I want to talk about dominance behavior in the workplace. I have a lot of friends who are psychologists and therapists and neuropsychologists too. So you know that dominance in the workplace and what to do about it is kind of a big topic these days, because a lot of people are coming in and saying, my boss is displaying outrageous dominance behavior and it's making me sick. So that's kind of a thing today. The other thing I also want to talk about is change and the Marine Corps, because as we've mentioned to people before, you're a Marine veteran, we're a machine gunner, went through boot camp and all of that. And I had a pretty funny experience one time when How to Hire a Champion, my book, How to Hire a Champion, had come out, and I got to interview one of the guys who was in charge of recruiting for the Marine Corps in one of the regions. And I was asking him about character, and I explained what I thought some of the top character traits were. And he said, well, that's very interesting. Those traits are, extremely important to the Marines as well. And then I said, so here's the big question. I said, do you think that in terms of character, that people can change? And he gave me the stoniest expression I've ever seen. And he crossed his arms and he looked at me and he said, son, what in the hell do you think we do with the Corps? And he was like, of course it can change. He says, because, we get in a young recruit and we'll ask them some questions and ask them to rate themselves on certain things and say, well, how would you rate yourself in the area of persistence? They might say 8. And I would say, well, how long do you think it's going to take you to move up the ranks in the Marine Corps if you stay at 8? And then they'll look at me and say, probably a pretty long time. And then I'll say, yeah, but I got some good news for you, because we're about to send you to a place called Parris Island. And I can absolutely guarantee you that the next time I see you and I ask you what you're to score yourself on persistence, you're going to say 11, sir. So that, I thought that was like pretty funny. He said, yeah, people can change, and that's what we do. But that's when you go to the Marine Corps, right? But what if you have a person who is supervising or leading other people and they're super rude, they're obnoxious, they're dominating, and they enjoy dominating other people? And there's no one's going to force them to change. No one's going to send them to Parris Island. They have no motivation. I mean, those people are causing a lot of trouble in the workplace today. How do we get those people to change so that people still feel engaged downstream and want to keep coming to work? Like, what do we do with those people?
So I think there's two different questions that are asked in this, right? Can people change? I think the answer is yes, for some of the reasons that I've laid out. Also, I mean, maybe there's some bias here, but there's no point to go into psychology to be a psychologist or therapist or any of that kind of stuff if you don't think people can change. Like, what's the point? You might as well go do something else. But maybe that's my bias. The other question though is, okay, so if we grant for a second that people can change, the second piece of that, or the next question is, are we willing to put the effort in to help them or to get that change, right? To move them in that direction? And the answer might be no, right? I mean, that's kind of an individual, from an employment perspective, like organization decision to make. I think it's worth the effort a lot of times. there's, I'm sure, cases where it's not. So again, there are two kind of different questions. So yes, I think people can change. Is it worth putting in the effort, or do we have the resources to do it? What I have found in my years of, different leadership roles or in HR is that often we're just not having real conversations with people. So when you say that somebody enjoys XYZ, enjoys being dominant, or you say that, they can't change or they won't change or whatever, what I found in most of those cases is that no one's actually really had a good conversation with that person to let them know. Like, I'll talk about like come to Jesus conversations, right? Like, be very frank, direct with them about the behavior, why it's a problem, and listing, like I gave in the example earlier, what are the specific behaviors that are problematic, and what can we do? What are some alternatives to those behaviors? Like, so when you do this, like, do this instead, right? Like, I think that's a really good strategy. It takes time. And so not everybody is willing to put in the time. I'm a firm believer, though, that if you invest in your employees, you put in that extra time, that you get more out of them in the end, and it's better for everybody, right? They keep a job, they become a better, person, employee, whatever, and you get more engagement, more production, all of that from them. So I think it's a win-win situation. But some companies just don't have the, ability to do that, or the desire to put in the work to get them to change. But I think, again, first making sure that they're aware. If nobody has ever had the conversation with them, how can we say that they're not able to change or willing to change?
Okay, well, I will tell you, I'm going to ask you an extremely difficult question. I'm going to put you in the hot seat, and I'm going to pretend that you are sitting in a CEO's office, which we both have, on more than one occasion, and had to have some tough talks. Here is something that I have had a CEO level conversation about more times than I can count. I will go in and I will say, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, what level of engagement do you really think that you have inside of your organization right now? Like, what, how much is your organization really collaborative and really engaged? Be honest. And I will often get maybe 75%. Really? It's that high? Oh, let me think about that again. Maybe 50. Yeah, maybe I was too high. Maybe 50. And I'll say, okay, so do you think that the members of your leadership teams cooperate and collaborate with one another to the degree that they should? Mm-mm. Do you think that they understand what other leaders really do in their day job to the extent that you would like them to know? Uh, Not as much as I would like. Okay, have you ever tried to fix that by any means in the future? I mean, in the past? Yeah, we've been working on. I can't tell you how many things we've done to try and fix that. Like what? Well, we've had a lot of assessments. We've had a lot of training organizations in here. Oh yeah, well, name me some names. They'll name, you know, the usual suspects. A lot of training organizations. Oh yeah, you did the whole thing. Yeah, we sure did. We put everybody through these programs. And what happened? Mm, Not much. I don't know. Everybody scored really high when they finished the exams, but things really haven't changed as much as we like. Well, let me ask you a final question. Are your people as good at developing and mentoring other people as you would like? No, David, and that's our number one problem. As a matter of fact, I'm glad you raised that because that's the thing that I would like to see happen the most is I would like to see leaders actually be able to develop their people. You just hit on it. No, the answer is no. So we've had those conversations before. So this seems to be what is going on in the world today, because I've heard it a lot of different times. When a CEO says that to you and says we've tried everything under the sun, but we still have those problems, and you had to break it down, knowing what you know as Dr. Brian Peters, Doctor of Engagement, what would you tell that CEO that they needed to do in the short term to get people to understand what others do and why they do it now by the end of the month, and to become better at mentoring and developing others and building true engagement at last? What would you recommend that they do under your guidance in the first 2 months?
When you were saying, the first part of, how do we make sure that everybody knows what everybody does, things like that. I am a big fan of leveraging town halls, and you can do it in big organizations or small organizations. And in those, talking about some of the challenges that are across regions, departments, things like that, going through, making sure that everybody understands what the other departments do, what other roles do, talk about how everything sort of works together, right? Try to get out of those silos. I'm a big fan of, and I feel like we might have talked about this before, but having people go and shadow in other departments, right? See how other departments work, see what challenges that they have. I'm a big fan of establishing things like onboarding buddies, for new employees. Get somebody who's been more seasoned to come in and really show somebody what really helps somebody understand the company. All of this, though, I don't know if it really matters if you don't have some fundamentals down. Like, do you have a clear vision for the organization, right? Do you have a clear mission for the organization? Do you have values for the organization that are embedded in everything that you do, right? Like through interview process, promotions, all of that kind of stuff. Like, do you live your values? Do people feel that? I think there's programs you can put in place. And so this is what's hard, sitting in that CEO. If they have all of that, then okay, we can start talking about specific programs. But I've seen often that people start at like the top or start with the solution programs, or they start adding on things without making sure that their foundation is good, right? Without doing very basic things. Like, again, what is the mission of the organization? What is the vision? What is the short-term and long-term vision of the organization? What is our 1, 3, 5, 10-year plan? What are our core values? And I think we'll talk about this at maybe another episode, but what are the foundational numbers? Like, I believe everybody should have have KPIs, or at least one number that's driving them. What are their top accountabilities? There's some basic things that you can do from a overall culture perspective and a foundational organization perspective before you start adding on these other things that I think are super valuable, right? Like, I think an onboarding buddy or a mentor program is super valuable. I think town halls are super valuable. In town halls, you can talk about the values and you can give examples of the values showing up within the organization. And I think all of that's valuable, but I think you do need to spend some time on the things I just talked: mission, vision, values, KPIs, things like that. I mean, the one organization that I ran for a while, we spent, we went through our values like 3 or 4 different times, and they shifted slightly until we landed where we really felt they were strong and we could embed them into the organization. And then once we had them, we worked on embedding them in the organization. I think often people will do things like what you're talking about. We have assessments and they have these people come in, these big consultants and whatever. They haven't done the underlying work. And so they give all these tasks, but they don't, there's no follow through after that, right? They're not grounded at anything. They're just out there by themselves. If I don't, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make that makes a huge amount of sense. When you said that, it makes me think of 2 um, aha moments that I've had in consulting with large organizations that tie in directly with what you said, that are kind of cut to the chase, huge light bulb moments that I've had. One occurred when I was coaching the leadership team of a rather large organization. And I said, people, 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 it's not rocket science. Just tell your people that you're managing, essentially, don't you dare come into my office with a problem without at least having the semblance of a proposal for a solution. Just don't do it. If you call me up and say you have a problem and something is concerning you, don't even bother setting a meeting with me or coming in unless you have a proposed solution for that problem. And it was almost like this sky opened up in this big light. They became so happy. They were like, wait a minute. So you're saying I don't have to tell them everything to do? And I was like, please, no, don't. They were like, that is so liberating. That's like, are you saying, wait a minute, David, are you saying to ask them to come up with a solution and ask me what I think about it? Yes. Wow. That's going to make my life so much easier. So that just one thing. Well, I'm glad that that helped. So a whole lot of managers started telling people, okay, so enough of the whining sessions. We know we have problems. We're looking for fixes. And that's why we're paying you. Okay. So just think about something that we could do better and then come in here and let's discuss that. But don't just come in here and say that we have a problem. So when they started doing that, everybody started talking a lot. And there became this, extremely heightened level of collaboration among people, where people were not afraid to go into their managers or people who are leading them, say, I think I know the answer. So the conversations became flipped. There were no longer managers saying, hi, I'm your manager and I'm going to tell you what to do. Rather, the entire conversations turned to, hey, I'm your manager and I need to know how you think that we should fix this. It kind of changed everything. The only problem that I saw, the only obstacle to that, rather, that I ever saw was when leaders were extremely unapproachable, when they just couldn't do that. And it was sort of, they couldn't get out of the my way or the highway mentality. And their ego was so large that they couldn't handle that kind of a collaborative conversation. Like, let's discuss a solution together. Those are two major aha moments that I've had in my consulting career. The idea of making sure that you ask the people, we want to hear how you think we should fix this, as being the primary part of the conversation. But then B, being approachable enough so they're not afraid to come in and see you and talk to you about that. Have you found similar tidbits of truth in your work in change management, getting organizations and people to change?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do think that the piece that you talked about managers being approachable is super important. If you want employees to have a voice, they need to feel like they can, like there's not going to be retribution for that. And so I think sometimes you get really hard-headed managers that make that difficult. I did actually, want to ask you though in this, you started off by talking, we're starting off by talking about, can people change? And you said that, we may disagree here. So I'd actually like to turn it back on you for a second and get your perspective on, you seem to have some doubts on whether or not, maybe I'm mischaracterizing this, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to have some doubts that people can change an organization. What makes you think that, if that is the case? And is there a certain like timeline? Like, is it, people who are more junior, it's easier versus more senior? Does that not matter? Is it completely individual? How do you look at that when you're looking at changing not just the organization, but the people, the behaviors within the organization?
Okay, that's a difficult question to answer. Obviously, I have a psychology background myself, done psychology research, and have written some books on business psychology. and have spent decades consulting around that. So obviously, I believe to a certain extent, yes, you can get people to change. My customers are individuals who want to change. Okay, so there's a big difference. So they engage me or buy my books or we consult because they want to change in the beginning, and then they say, show me some tips how I can get along better with people or get along better with my customers and that kind of thing. uh, yes, those people can be helped. There is a problem, though, I think, inherently with the way some people view the world or just the way that they interact with people. And I think I told you I was having a conversation with my brother when I was much younger. And I told him, I said, man, I think there's two types of people in the world. There's people that when you interact with them in a room alone, you walk away and you feel 10 feet taller. And then there's people in the world that when you interact with them alone in a room, you walk away and you just feel like an inch tall. I think that's just as true today as when I said it when I was a kid. Because I do think that there are people out there that just, there's something in them that's a spiritual thing. And I know we've had a conversation about this. It's not something, I don't think that's trainable from a behavioral change standpoint. There's just something about their spirit and the way that they interact and perceive other human beings that they view other people as lesser than, and they make people feel lesser than. And that's just who they are. And if that's who they are, you can take every training program in the world or read every book about leadership styles or leadership change, and it's not going to change who they are. So I do have these existential thoughts. Can some people really, really, really ever change, no matter what you do? And for some people, I think the answer is no, probably not. Not unless they have, as you said earlier, a come to Jesus moment, which apparently they haven't had yet. So if they don't, I think that becomes problematic. So inside of an organization, I say, if you ever find one of those people, we might call those people the rotten apple. I always say, you need to get rid of the rotten apple now. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think most people aren't rotten apples. We can help most people because most people, I think, do have a desire to change. But for those select and few rotten apples, I think we need to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I don't think that. Yeah, it does. I don't think that we disagree too much. I think what I worry about is if we are too quick to get rid of the rotten apples, right? Because we're making the assumption that they can't change, right? If we just go into it assuming that they can't, I worry we end up hurting ourselves in the long run and hurting other people in the long run, right? Because we're getting rid of people who could have been great, could have been good, whatever, right? They could be great fits for the organization. And so if we just look at people who just aren't instantly doing well in a role or within an organization or have some behaviors that are destructive and we just cut them loose, I just worry that could be the wrong approach. And I worry that we start to assume that everybody is that maybe 1% that can't be helped, right? Before we start having the conversations with them. Now, I gave an example a few episodes ago about somebody that I spoke to that was a problem, did not see it, was not willing to hear it, no matter how direct I was with them. That person is not in a place where they are going to change right now. Doesn't mean never, but they're not going to change right now, right? And so those type of people, yeah, maybe they need to leave an organization. But I see that as the minority, and I just worry about, depending on how we frame it or how we talk about it, that people will start seeing that as the majority, and rather than putting in the effort to help people be the best that they can be in an organization, they're just going to get rid of them because it's too much effort.
Wow, that's really cool that you said that. I mean, I think that you're probably on a higher spiritual plane than I am. You may be more optimistic than I am. But I loved what you said. And so let's close out this episode with this. I love something that you just said, because I think everybody would love to have a boss like you, that someone that's always willing to give people the very last chance, to give them every benefit of the doubt. You seem like that kind of guy. That's very noble of you. So, what are some of the things that you do? And we'll close out with this because we started with, can people change? And we talked about, why people need to be able to change. And I think the answer is so that they can build more collaborative teams, right? Where people aren't fearful of interacting with one another and just being themselves, right? That's why you'd want to change, just to become more approachable and better at working with other people to the greatest extent. But let's close with this. If you had to deal with that person that everyone else had given up on, and you probably had to do this before, and said, okay, so everyone has kind of come to the conclusion that you're a jerk, that we put you through 14 training programs and it didn't work. You're still kind of obnoxious. You seem to be driving a lot of people away. No one really wants you to be their leader or their manager, but I haven't given up on you yet because I still think I can break through. I still think I can get you to see the light. If you have to deal with that person and you've done everything humanly possible and they still don't seem to get it, what do you do in your last ditch effort to get a person like that to change? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, a last ditch effort, I think, is outlining exactly what you just outlined, right? Like, just have a very frank conversation. My hope would be by the time we get there, that I've built a rapport with that person, so they know that when I come to them with this stuff, I don't have malicious intent, right? That I want them to be the best they can. I want them to be successful. That is my goal. I care about them as an individual. I want them to be successful. That's always my goal with anybody that I manage, or in any sort of, I mean, even people I don't manage, colleagues and stuff. Like, I want them to know I'm here to support them, and and I care about them, and I want them to do well. So if I've established that, hopefully I have, then yeah, it's just very direct, like you're saying, outlining all of this. And then you do a little bit of seek to understand, right? We talked about curiosity in one of the last episodes. It's really just like, help me understand what's going on here, right? Because we've done this, that doesn't seem to work. We've done this, that doesn't seem to work. I'm getting this feedback. These are all the issues. Like, do you see this? Do you, what is your perspective on all of this, right? And try to understand their side of the argument, or their side of the situation. And then if I can understand that, then again, I think we can start to work on direct advice, or, tips on, okay, we don't have to change it all at once. Let's take some baby steps here and say, okay, so there's a laundry list of issues. Maybe we figure out what is the most pressing, what are the ones that, are going to make the biggest impact, and let's strategize on how do we fix those things. So let's say we talked about dominance behavior. Let's say they are constantly interrupting in meetings. They are bulldozing, what I would call bulldozing people, where it's their ideas, they're pushing forward. Work with them to coach them and just say, like, you're right, it's fine to have your ideas. I want your ideas to be the last one, right? So I want you to sit quiet until everybody else has had their say, and then you can have your say, and then I want you to be quiet and leave some room for silence, right? And we can just see how that works, right? And because it might not be that they're actually a jerk, it might just be they're really excited about this idea, and so they really believe in it, so they're really pushing it forward, but it comes across like they're being a jerk, right? So, like, let's just try a different approach and just see how it works. So, you just go through that exercise, right? And get their perspective, figure out how they're viewing the world. I know it's kind of cliche when people think about, like, their truth, and like there's only one truth, but the fact is, like, we all have our own perceptions. Our whole world is colored by our perspective, right? Like, how we all see it slightly differently. That's why eyewitness testimony is not very reliable. So the same thing here, right? Like, so let's get their perspective. And then at the end of the day, like, if you've gone through that, if you've given tips, you've given advice and nothing's happened, and it's not fixing, then yeah, I agree with you. At some point, this is just not a good fit for them, and they need to go on to something else that's a better fit. But I would do that as a last ditch effort, is really understand their side, give them, figure out what's the most pressing things, give them some real world actionable stuff, not just saying, hey, be nicer, don't be a jerk, whatever. Like give them real concrete examples of things they can do and see if that works. And if it doesn't, then you coach them out.
That's great. I think we should touch on these in our podcast to come. So to close this out, I'm just going to ask you a series of yes or no questions. You can just answer yes to every question, and then I'm not going to ask you to answer anything because we'll get to the answers in subsequent podcast on how HR leaders can deal with people like this. But just for the heck of it, I'm just going to ask you 3 or 4 very simple questions, and you can give me yes or no answers. So you're Dr. Peters, and you literally have your doctorate in engagement. You know a lot about this stuff. If you were in a large room, in a conference room at a conference with, say, 1,000 human resource leaders or managers in the room, and you ask the question, hey, does anyone out there think that they have some bad apples running around in the organization that are kind of ruining everything that you've tried to build a better culture, a better sense of engagement in the workplace? Has anyone out there run across some bad apples in the organization that are kind of ruining everything? Do you think that you would see most of the people in the audience raise their hand? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then if you said, okay, for those people, everybody raised their hand, would you say at this particular point that you've tried everything under the sun, every, training organization's best material off the shelf, run them through the programs, PowerPoints, send them away for retreats, done everything humanly possible, and they're still a bad apple, and you've kind of run out of ideas to do? Have you ever had anyone like that in your organization? Do you think that most of the people in the room, like 999 out of 1,000, would raise their hand?
Yeah.
Okay. So then would you be able to say to those people, there's good news, because Dr. Brian Peters, I can come back, or right now, I can show you a couple of things that you can do with those bad apples as last ditch efforts to get them to finally see the light. It'll kind of be like going to Paris Island for the weekend, and we're just going to have a good old time. We're going to take it to another level. It's going to be super fun. It's going to be like a little boot camp. But if you listen to me and you do this, I think I can show you how to salvage some of those bad apples. And they said, you could really do that for us? Would your answer be yes?
With the clarification of some, yes.
Okay, good. Well, that being said, then why don't we come back in one of our subsequent podcasts and talk about that, how we can work with and help those people who are so obstinate or resistant to change to make our workplaces a little less difficult. And we'll also talk next time about the importance of individual change, our personal responsibility to change ourselves. And we'll talk about that next time. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Dr. Peters, as always, it's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. And I guess we will talk to you next time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Future of Engagement podcast. We'd love to keep the conversation going down in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like. And if you want to stay in the loop of future episodes, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next one.